Good afternoon, everyone. So again, my name is Brendan Sullivan. For those of you that I haven't met, I'm going to walk you through some of the digitalization efforts that we're going through specific to air cargo. The first thing that I want to mention is that digitalization is one of our 3 industry priorities. So it's absolutely a top priority for us in the industry and for all of our members and all of the stakeholders within the supply chain. Part of that is because it actually helps us underpin the other priorities that we have, such as sustainability and safety and security. We've already heard about the effect of data and digitalization on those 2 areas throughout aviation. For us specifically, we're looking at the move away from legacy standards, which were peer-to-peer messaging standards based on 50-year-old technology, towards a data sharing approach using more modern web APIs. That's going to help us be faster and more efficient, and once again help us drive and underpin many of the other initiatives that we're working on. Collectively, we are calling this the IATA One Record standard, and it's the key towards digitalization. First, it provides a common global data model where we can define all the data that is required to be shared across the supply chain. Air cargo can use up to 30 individual documents, many of which are paper, with lots of different data in it. And so this actually allows us to define all of those different aspects into a single global data model for harmonization and for consistency. It improves the communication across the supply chain because it actually allows the different actors in the supply chain to access that data only once, rather than sharing it and repeating it and typing it in and potentially leading to errors. It will improve the visibility and the transparency, which is a clear requirement from the shippers and customers of air cargo. And it also enhances the quality of the data. Once again, it's not rekeyed in, it's not repeated as a message and shared to another party. It's accessed via these web APIs. It's shared by the people who have it and own it to the people who need it for that particular function. And because we're using web APIs, it's obviously a lot easier to connect. It's a lot faster to connect parties, and essentially puts us in a place to be future ready when it comes to digital cargo for any requirement that comes up that goes beyond the capabilities of the existing messaging standards. Now, One Record works if it's implemented, and if it's implemented widely across the industry. There are use cases that work within a single company, but it works best when we're talking about sharing this data across the supply chain. So we've had over 200 companies involved in pilot programs. 10 of those are actually moving towards advanced operational implementations. We recognize the need for governments to be involved, so they've been involved in a number of these proof of concepts and pilots as well, from the European Union, the United Nations, in the United States, in China, and other government authorities. That could have been customs or security or other regulators. We've done a number of hackathons to try and test and design and figure out and explore new use cases that might exist, where we've had over 800 experts actually develop 100 projects, some of which are actually operational today. We recognize that air freight is multimodal. Everything that flies moves first by surface, and then there are many things which fly and then use surface mode as well. And so the requirement is that this standard is harmonized across all the modes. We're targeting an industry-wide adoption of 1 January 2026, where the industry would be capable of using the One Record standards and exchanging data across the supply chain. A number of the service providers, the big IT service providers in the industry, have actually embraced this. They have this in their roadmaps, and that represents a coverage of about 80% of the IT service provision in the industry, which is fantastic. And we've taken an open source approach. This is to drive that cooperation and to make available those resources. That's part of why the hackathons are so successful, and that's part of why we have as much industry scaling as we do. So a couple of examples of One Record actually in action. The first one is in Hong Kong, the Greater Bay Area. And the uniqueness of Hong Kong and the Greater Bay Area, if you're not familiar with it, is that A lot of what moves, in particular during and since the pandemic, will move across a number of modes of transport. So we'll have a small amount of road or surface transport. That might go to another terminal, and then that will move by barge or by maritime, followed by an air leg for the large international Trans-Pacific. So that was the example used here. The same data was shared, and so Houston Logistics was able to access the data and share it with Cathay and with Hong Kong International Airport across the supply chain. So data created once, owned and retained by the data owner, and shared seamlessly across the supply chain with those parties who needed it for the specific function that they needed it. This obviously reduces any redundancies. What will often happen is that the road transport documentation will have to be rekeyed into maritime documentation, will have to be rekeyed again into air transport documentation, and shared amongst the supply chain parties. This actually eliminates that. It means there are less or no inconsistencies in that data, and it's obviously a lot faster. In addition, the tracking and information and visibility on where the shipments actually are was shared across the supply chain, so the customer has full visibility on what's happening and why. Another example from the same part of the world, this time using an IoT device. This is an Internet of Things connected device. We use these a lot in air cargo because we transport sensitive, either by temperature or by conditions, cargo. So the example that was tested here was actually semiconductor thermal paste. It's particularly sensitive to the conditions that it's being transported in. And so we attach these devices to them, to the packages, to monitor the condition of the shipment. In this case, the freight forwarder was able to access the airline's Internet of Things information to verify the condition, as well as the actual location of their semiconductor thermal paste. And so they were able to access that via a web API, very quick connection, and they're accessing the same information that the airline has so that they can be proactive in their decision making, and they can understand and have confidence that the conditions that they require the goods to be maintained in are being maintained. Another good example of that is in air transport, we do transport a significant amount of vaccines. During the pandemic, we moved around billions of doses of the COVID-19 vaccine, but we do that on a daily basis. They have very strict temperature control requirements to maintain the viability of the vaccine. And so again, we apply these temperature monitoring devices. And so the shipper was, in this case, able to access that, again, via an Internet of Things platform to understand all the conditions that were happening in real time to the vaccines as they were moving throughout the supply chain. So that could have been, the temperature on the ground, as well as the temperature in the air, and everything that happened in between throughout the journey, making sure that ultimately what gets into the patient's arms is actually exactly what was intended when it was developed. We also wanted to look at how can we speed up this process of digitalization in air cargo. The industry is making progress, making good progress, but what are the other levers that we could explore to speed up the digitalization? So in 2023, the Cargo Advisory Council, which is our members who offer advice to IATA and to the industry, took a look at this, and they decided to develop a digitalization leadership charter. It's built along 5 pillars. The first, developing a unified and collaborative digital strategy. So this is ensuring that we have interoperability of the standards, that they're harmonized, that as we move forwards, we can move across modes of transport, and the entire supply chain is well served. The other is, the next is enhancing organizational resilience. So this is around cybersecurity and the infrastructure, as well as the responsible use of new and emerging technologies like artificial intelligence. Digitalization is a great way to help us in our sustainability journey, having that data, understanding it, and so there's also a focus on supporting eco-friendly technology initiatives using that data responsibly. Fourth, pursuing digital excellence. So There are many emerging trends, many of which will actually help air cargo jump forwards in its digitalization journey, and we need to track those and stay ahead of them. Probably the prime example is generative AI, where that may help fill in some of the gaps in digitizing some of our documentation. And the last is using technology ethically, embracing those emerging technologies in a responsible fashion. This group actually is meeting right now twice a year. We launched at World Cargo Symposium this year with 5 signatories. We are currently at 17 signatories, with more to come before the end of the year. So like I said, they meet twice a year, and they discuss ways that they can enable and cooperate along the angle of speeding up digitization in the air cargo industry. In North Asia, actually, we just earlier this month launched the North Asia Digital Cargo Alliance, which brings together another 15 companies, leaders in the space, some of which are already signatories of the charter, and some of which are to join in the future. But really the same 5 key principles, and seeing how they can leverage what's happening in North Asia and really speed up digitalization. I talked about these devices that we use in air cargo. We use them quite a lot. Sometimes it's shippers and freight forwarders who place them onto packages and containers. Sometimes it's the airlines themselves. And they're very important for the purpose of monitoring the conditions of transportation. But there are a number of different requirements to be met when it comes to approvals for these devices to actually be used. So that could be interference or cooperation with the aircraft systems, as well as things like battery safety. So we have developed an air cargo device assessment to streamline and expedite that approval process of these tracking devices and data loggers. We had previously developed a recommended practice on what those approvals should look like, and so we help companies who have those devices to actually show that they are in compliance with the recommended practice, which then allows the airlines to speed up their approval process. So it doesn't replace the airline approval process, but it helps facilitate so that they understand what conditions have already been met, and that those devices have actually already gone through a certification process. So we've actually had the first certified company, so it's Living Packets. They have a secure and reusable smart package, and we just finished the device assessment for its packaging shipping solution called The Box. And really this adds an element of efficiency for the industry, so the people who make these devices can show what steps they've already gone through. The airlines can uptake that much more quickly and improve their own approval processes. And then it provides a uniform way to make sure that we can help improve safety, so that we don't have as many potential devices out there that don't meet the requirements of the regulations. So with that, I thank you very much. I'm happy to answer some questions around digitalization in air cargo.
Thank you, Ben. To any degree, you see that the air cargo can be affected by the rapidly evolving geopolitical and economical situation globally, and in Middle East and Africa especially.
It's a significant amount of uncertainty, I would say, in the industry. And there's probably the 2 aspects to that. There's the geopolitical portion of it, where we've had trade disruptions this past year. Some of that has affected air cargo directly, with the requirement to circumnavigate and fly around certain areas. The other has actually affected it positively, which we saw in the Red Sea, where we had the maritime sector was the one that was disrupted, and air cargo was in a position to actually take on that freight and move it. So both sides actually, sort of an upside and a downside to that geopolitical. And the other is what we see in terms of uncertainty, how it evolves on the trade side and the trade policy side, all of which is a little bit unknown. We've just had a number of elections this year, including in the United States. There will be trade policy changes very likely, and we don't know what they will look like. I think the one sort of bottom line is just to remind people just how resilient air cargo actually is. Air cargo was nearly completely stopped during the pandemic and immediately responded to that. And the entire industry was struggling, and air cargo was in a position to actually come and continue to move goods. That started with PPE, then vaccines, and continue to support global supply chains everywhere. So there will be further disruption. I think we can see that, and it's a significant headwind for the air cargo industry to pay attention to. But it's something that the air cargo industry is relatively used to dealing with, and will continue to be resilient in managing around.